Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Cyber Q&A webinar. Thank you all for joining me today. My name is Sherry Branson, and I'm your host. Kevin Davis, the president of Kevin Davis Insurance, is the main presenter, and Kevin is joining me right now from Los Angeles, and I'm in Texas. And good afternoon, Kevin. How are you?
Hello there. How are you doing?
Doing great, doing great. We're drying out a little bit here in Texas after all the rain and all the weather, the hectic
Wow,
weather.
yeah, I heard you had a really tough time last few days, huh?
Yeah, it's been really rough here for a lot of people. Luckily, we were okay, but a lot of people are hurting. But we seem to be bouncing back and the weather's drying out. So things are looking better now, much better. Thank
Well,
you.
that's good. Glad to hear that. I'm glad to
Yeah.
hear
Yeah. And Kevin, I know today we're going to talk about all the questions that people have about cyber coverage for community associations. And I just wanted to mention to everybody, if you have any new questions that pop into your mind as we're doing today's webinar, please feel free to email them to me at sbranson@kdins.com. And I'm happy to answer them at the end of the session, or if we run out of time, we'll get in touch with you later on. And Kevin, this is a very hot topic right now. And so can you talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, you know what? This is our third cyber webinar. And what we decided to do is put all the questions and answers together, the questions together that we've received over the past couple of months, and condense them into one webinar. So hopefully by the time this webinar is over, you really get a thorough understanding of what cyber liability is all about.
Absolutely. And we did receive lots of interesting questions from all of you that are joining us today. And one of the questions that came in was from Melissa Cardette in Florida. And Melissa wants to know, Kevin, how does cyber liability benefit a condominium or homeowners association?
Okay. When you look at a community association, the board members, there are volunteers whose job is to maintain, enhance, and protect the association asset, which is the community association itself. Protecting the asset also includes the information that's in their care, custody, and control. The cyber policy protects the board when a unit owner, a renter, a contractor, past unit owners, manager, or other board members is upset because they believe the board lost that very valuable personal information that's entrusted to them.
And that's scary. That's very scary if your personal information is hacked, because that can cause lots of problems. And Kevin, with board members being volunteers, many community association boards, I would think, lack the understanding of the importance of cyber risk and cyber liability.
And that's the problem. There's a lack of understanding of cyber at that board level, because the starting point is the data itself. Community association directors and officers have a duty to protect the personal identifiable information they have and understand that it's their responsibility and it cannot be delegated to the property manager or another employee.
Absolutely. And I would think, Kevin, that the problem would be once the board is aware of a cybersecurity issue, then they have to decide what to do with it, correct? Where do they go with it?
And that's the problem, because if they choose to ignore it or not handle it correctly, there are fines and penalties associated with non-disclosure. Now, if they disclose too soon, there's a potential for significant damage to the community association's reputation. Okay? See, there's a difference between an incident and an actual data breach. See, an incident is any event that compromises the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of the information. For example, once an individual loses a laptop. Okay? Now, while data breach is an incident that resulted in confirmation that the information is on there has been unauthorized, like the information that's on the laptop itself.
Okay, so that's a difference. And again, if anybody has any questions about what we're going over today, feel free to email me the questions, and if we have time, we'll get to them at the end. If not, we'll get in touch with you later. And Kevin, I did receive a question here from Tom Smith of the Sullivan Group, and Tom Smith wants to know, what exactly is a data breach?
Okay, when we're talking about data breaches, we're talking about personal information and breach of security. Now, when you talk about breach of security, we're talking about the unlawful and unauthorized acquisition of personal information that compromises security, confidentiality, integrity of personal information. So you have an unauthorized use of information. Personal information. Now, personal information is an individual's first name or first initial and last name plus one or more of the following: Social Security number, driver's license number or state issue ID card, account number, credit card number, or debit card number, combined with security code, access code, PIN numbers, or passwords. So it must include the first name and one of the pieces of information.
Okay.
So you had this big disaster last week with the rain throughout Texas.
Yes.
Let's say that paper gets washed out with everybody's Social Security number who live in your association.
Mm-hmm.
But you look at it and you see a Social Security number. That's not a data breach unless your name is attached to it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the two pieces of information have to be there. It can't just be a name or a Social Security number. Interesting. That's very interesting.
And personal information does not include information that's available in public domain. So like if you go and Google somebody's name and the name is there, the address, and all that pertinent information, that's not a data breach. It has to include the first name plus and last name plus any of the other pieces of information.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin. And another question just came in. How do these data breaches happen?
Okay. For community associations, there are many ways data breach can happen. Okay. They usually come from either an intentional action, which includes hacking, employee dishonesty, and theft of equipment, such as the laptop we talked about, or by deception, okay, where people obtain information by fraudulent means. Okay. Now, many data breaches occur because of an employee error, from passwords left on computer screens and employees opening emails they should not open at all, to lost laptops and smartphones. A large portion of security breaches occur because of employee actions.
Yes, I know. I did see a bank that was hacked because employees received a phishing email. So that you see that all the time.
And that's what happens, and that's what we get all the time. We get these phishing emails. See, the cyber people out there will always follow the path of least resistance. This means targeting the very business that least can afford it. They know what to look for and how to look for it.
And Kevin, you're talking about community associations. There's many ways that these breaches can occur. And associations don't have big IT departments. They don't have most of them don't have technical consultants. So I would think they'd be pretty vulnerable.
Yeah, because a lot of these smaller organizations, these smaller companies, the problem is that they're not even understanding certain things they should have, like spyware protection, anti-spam protection, okay? And some of them don't even bother to have a firewall themselves. So they really are behind the 8 ball when it comes to protecting their information.
Absolutely. It's very vulnerable, very, very vulnerable. And now, Kevin, are there any state laws requiring businesses to take action if there is actually a data breach?
Yes. In the U.S. right now, 47 states require security breach notifications. And there are penalties if the organization does not come forward and tell its customers that their personal information may have been compromised. Now, soon, we believe all 50 states will have similar requirements. Now, for example, in California, SB 24 requires notification including a description of the incident, the type of personal information that was breached, the time of the breach, toll-free numbers, and the address of the credit reporting agencies. Now, in addition to that, SB 24 requires the breached business to send an electronic copy of the notification to the California Attorney General if a single breach affects more than 500 residents.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So California has a very good law in effect, and it would behoove the brokers to know what the laws are in their state. And so they can inform their clients if anything like this does occur. And then, Kevin, what about federal laws? Are there any federal laws on this topic?
Oh, sure. You have the FCC, Federal Trade Commission, all the health HIPAA laws that require certain things that have to be done to protect the information that people have.
Absolutely. Okay, that's very good to know. And now, Kevin, I'm sure a lot of people are wondering that are attending the webinar today. Can you explain how to calculate the costs of a data breach?
Okay, this is the important part, because this is what the coverage is all about. This is what the coverage will protect you from. So when we talk about the cost of data breach, number one is a forensic examination. The examination determines if there's a breach and the severity and scope of the breach. It may be an incident, like we talked about before, an incident and not an actual breach. So you have to have a forensic examination to find out. A forensic exam can be performed by the company's internal staff. It doesn't have to be by a outsourced third party.
Okay. Now that would, to me, if it's done internally, that doesn't seem to hold as much credibility.
Exactly. I recommend to look outside, third party, to just ensure its legitimacy.
And it's objective. You feel like it's an objective
Exactly.
examination.
So the first one is forensic examination. Number two, notification of third parties. So you have to notify the individuals that were affected. Now, most states, as I said earlier, have enacted data breach notification laws, but once that information is lost or stolen or compromised, you have to notify these individuals. So any company out there, you have to review each state-specific requirement and determine the best way to comply with these notification laws.
Absolutely. And that would be the victims of the data breach.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
the third party. Okay.
And so you have call centers. So now companies may want to consider providing a toll-free number in the notification letters for individuals wanting more information about the extent of the breach. Now, some states require you have to have a call center, but you should have one anyway.
Yes, and I was one of the victims of the Anthem breach, and they provided us with a 1-800 number to call, and that made me feel much better because I felt like I had a person I could ask questions from rather than just all emails and all on the computer by myself.
And on top of that, what Anthem did is it's offer you credit and identity monitoring.
They did, yes, and I signed up for it right away.
Now, that's not required by law in most states, but you provide it because it makes good business sense. Now, the key thing, though, is that you have to register for it. If you don't register for it, you don't get it because it is additional cost that Anthem has to pay for, and so they're looking forward to you to seeing it and ignoring that email.
Okay, so it's really up to the customer, the consumer, to take it into their own hands and sign up for it. They're not going to do it for you.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the fifth one is public relations. A company may need to engage a PR firm that specializes in damage control to help reduce the harm it's caused the company's reputation.
And I would think, Kevin, with that, I mean, really the long-term effects of losing customers, losing business, I mean, it could really damage a company in the long term. So
Yes.
public relations is very important.
And that's why that's there, because the first four are covered under a lot of policies. Public relations expenses are not covered in a lot of policies. So you have to make sure that public relations expense is included. Okay?
Absolutely.
Number 6 is legal defense. Now, when we talk about legal defense, we're talking about the potential liabilities as a result of the data breach itself, which includes the cost to identify victims of identity theft.
Okay. So if there's a breach, Kevin, my identity was stolen, I have the right to sue for damages. Is that what you're saying?
And that's what you have to. That's what happens. Okay. So all of a sudden you've lost your information. Somebody has access to it. They take out a loan in your name. It's Anthem's responsibility. So you'll see a lot of people suing Anthem as a result of the situation.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And on top of it, it also provides coverage for indemnity to indemnify financial institutions for their costs related just to reissue credit cards.
Okay, I can imagine that would be really expensive if they're reissuing thousands of credit cards.
Exactly. Yep.
So what?
The bank is holding them responsible.
And so you're saying the banks have a right to sue also?
That's what it is. Yeah. Yep.
Interesting.
They're on top of it. Not only the individuals going to sue, but the banks, other financial institutions who have to reissue those credit cards have to do it also. So number 7, regulatory proceedings, fines, and penalties. Depending on the nature of the breach, a company may have to defend itself against federal and state authorities such as the Federal Trade Commission, as I said before, or the state attorney general. And that company may be subject to fines and penalties. Now, the cost of these types of investigation remain high, and the legal costs of fines and penalties should be covered under your insurance policy. So when you buy a cyber policy, regulatory proceeding, fines, and penalties should be insured, which is totally different because most insurance policies, fines and penalties are excluded, can't be insurable.
Okay, so that's a very important coverage then.
Yeah. And here's an example. A company specializing in consumer information suffered a data breach that resulted in the theft of 100,000 Social Security numbers. The Federal Trade Commission launched an investigation against the company alleging unfair and deceptive trade practices because the FTC found that the company did not have basic security measures in place at the time of the breach, despite advertising on the website that its content of its privacy policy was outstanding and nobody has access to anything. What happens is a company was fined $500,000 by the FTC and required to implement a comprehensive written information security program that was subject to audit for the next 10 years.
$500,000. So these are not small fines. These are large fines.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And Kevin, now when you say this comprehensive written information security program, that's a long term. What exactly is that?
Yeah. What happens is once a regulatory agency is involved, after that breach, they may require the breach company to implement a comprehensive written information security program where they have written detailed explanation in terms of how they're going to protect the personal identifiable information from each organization.
Oh, I see. So basically what they're doing is they're saying you have to put together this program, you have to have something in place to prevent this from happening again in the future.
Exactly. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense.
So those are your costs you talked about, those 8 individual costs that you have to pay for whenever there's a data breach.
Okay, and that's a lot of costs. That's a lot of things that people may not think about, when it comes to a data breach. And now, Kevin, we're talking about costs. What do you believe is the average cost per record?
Okay, the average loss for a breach of 1,000 records is between $52,000 and $87,000, according to the Verizon 2015 Data Breach Investigators Report.
Okay, that's pretty high.
It is, and for the community association, the actual number of records can vary significantly. For example, how many, you live in an association, right?
Yes,
How many units do you have?
We have between 48 and 50, I think.
Okay, so if you look at about 50 units there, okay, and at least 2 records per household, and then somebody has as many as 4, okay? So that's between 150 to 200 records per association. And then on top of it, you have the renters, you have the people who moved out, you have people who completed applications, and then you have the vendors, landscapers, pool management company. So you're looking at a breach of about 250 records potentially.
That's a lot of records.
And that's a loss of about $13,000 to $22,000 per association.
Okay, and my association is one of the smaller ones. There are lots of them out there that have thousands of units. But
you don't need that many. If you have, let's say you have 500 or 300 associations, 300 units in your association. Again, you're talking about, that could be about 1,000 records right there. So you're talking about, an average association of 250, 300 units. You're talking about $50,000 in costs. Yeah, the numbers just keep getting bigger and bigger, and people aren't thinking about the renters, the vendors, etc. I mean, it just keeps spreading out and spreading out. That's the point.
And Kevin, here's a good question that came in. What happens if a board gets sued that doesn't carry cyber? Can they use their homeowner's insurance or their GL policy?
Okay, this is a good question because a lot of times people believe that their homeowner's policy or CGL policy will cover these kinds of situations. The problem is that the CGL and the homeowner's policy covers bodily injury and property damage caused by an occurrence. It does not cover economic damages from the failure to protect personal information held by the insured. That's not covered in your GL or your homeowner's policy. It's covered under the cyber policy. Okay, so there's no coverage under the homeowners or GL. Okay, that's good to know. That's very good to know. And thanks for clearing that up. And now, Kevin, if I'm shopping for a cyber policy for my customers, can you explain to everybody joining us today, what are the main coverages for cyber insurance? Okay. The first 2 coverages are liability coverages. One is network and information security liability. The second one is regulatory defense expense. Part 2 of the cyber policy is first-party expenses, including security breach notification expense and crisis management expense. Okay. So as far as cyber insurance goes, when you say network and information security liability, what exactly is that? Okay, that is when an insured suffers a loss for a network information security wrongful act. Oh, okay. And now, what is a wrongful act? Network and security information wrongful act? Sure. When we talk about a wrongful act, okay, this is a wrongful act insuring agreement, okay? This is the lawsuit that is filed after the security breach for failing to prevent the breach from occurring in the first place. Okay. Now, what's interesting about our policy is that we are extending coverage to the property manager. Okay. So it extends to the property manager, and most associations do have property managers. So what you're saying, Kevin, is the insured also means the property manager. Yeah. And the reason is because the community association managers are the ones with access to the personal information. That is the responsibility of the community association board of directors. See, most people ignore that fact that even though the manager has that information, it is still the board's responsibility.
Ah, okay. So what you're saying is, even if the manager loses the information, the personal information of the homeowners, et cetera, ultimately the responsibility falls on the board.
That's right. But we believe that providing the coverage for the property manager under the association's policy, we're eliminating any future problems in terms of who should respond to the data breach claim. Because basically what will happen is they'll start pointing fingers at each other.
Absolutely. Okay, so this prevents that from happening. They're all covered. Okay. And now, Kevin, you mentioned regulatory defense expenses coverage. What exactly is that?
Okay. This is the claim. When a claim comes in by a state attorney general or the Federal Trade Commission, the FCC, or any other federal, state, local, or federal government entity. So it's when that entity comes in and files a claim against the breach company.
Ah, I see. Okay. And so can you give an example of that, Kevin?
Sure. Basically, when the FTC comes in, Federal Trade Commission comes in, and they look at the problem not being corrected, they'll impose fines and penalties. This policy will provide, this coverage will provide the coverage for the fines and penalties.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, thank you. And now, first-party claims. When we move on to that, what are crisis management event expenses?
Okay, this is the simple one. These are expenses incurred for public relations services.
Oh, okay.
That's it.
Public relations services. Okay. And what about security breach remediation and notification expenses?
I know, isn't that long?
These are very long terms.
And
I feel like I have to be a lawyer to understand these.
It's the notification part. You have to notify the individuals. This pays expense for notification and any other reasonable fees, costs, or expenses associated with the security breach.
Okay.
That's all.
Okay, that's all. Yeah. Thank you for explaining it in plain English.
I know.
And now, Kevin, everybody's always worried about exclusions. What are the standard policy exclusions found on the cyber policy? What should I be looking out for?
Okay. The first one is you have a war, invasion, acts by a foreign enemy. This is a standard war exclusion found in most policy. However, there is a carve-out for acts of terrorism as defined in the TRIA, Terrorism Risk Insurance Act. And one more note that a state-sponsored cyber attack may be considered an act of war and coverage may be excluded.
Oh, okay. So when you say a state-sponsored, that would be another country, right? State,
yeah.
Like an state, like a. Okay, and I wonder if the Sony attack, the cyber attack, where they thought Korea had hacked them, if that would fall under this.
That would, and if Congress said that was a state-sponsored and an act of war, then it probably would be any coverage under this policy.
Okay. Okay, that's good to know.
So we have a bodily injury, property damage, and pollution are absolute exclusion. So any claim arising from attributable to those are not covered. Any known facts, circumstances, or event, which is the prior knowledge section of the liability policy, make sure that's not covered. Now, the next one is your dishonesty, fraud, willful violation, gain, profit, or advantage. This deals with intentional acts by employees. Now, the difference here is that there's a carve back for defense costs until final adjudication establishes the individual committed intentional act. So the difference between this and our policy and most other policies is that any type of dishonest act is covered by the crime policy. What we're saying is that we'll provide defense until it's determined that there's been a dishonest act or intentional act has occurred.
Okay, thanks for explaining that in more detail. And again, if anybody has any questions about what we're going over today, or if you want a copy of today's webinar, please send me an email to sbranson@kdins.com, and we'll try to get to your questions at the end if you have more questions as well. If not, we'll give you a call. This question just came in, Kevin. What about prior acts coverage?
Okay. Cyber liability is written on a claims-made basis. This means that the claim will respond to claims that are made during the policy period. A particular feature of a claims-made policy is that they usually contain a continuity date, retroactive date, pending, and prior date, which limits coverage to claims arising out of an event that occurred after a certain date. So the first time you purchase coverage, that date is typically set at the policy inception date. In future years, you can keep the prior acts date so the retroactive date gets longer and longer. The challenge with prior acts in cyber coverage is tricky because of how long hackers might be inside a system before being detected. Let's say you first buy a cyber policy in January 2015. In March, you learn the system has been breached. You investigate and learn the breach was kicked off in July or 2014 when your property manager unknowingly fell victim to a phishing attack and gave his password to a hacker posing as a member of the IT group. Okay? Mm-hmm. Now, without prior acts coverage, the insurer can argue that the entire breach is based on the act that occurred before you purchase coverage. See, that's why it's important to purchase a cyber policy as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you for explaining that. That's a rather complicated topic, so if you have further questions about prior acts, please send an email or give us a phone call. And now, Kevin, we received another question from Melissa Cardette in Florida. And Melissa wants to know, she says, I noticed the Hartford Steam Boiler offers data compromise and identity recovery limits on their equipment breakdown coverage quotes. How is your cyber liability policy different?
Okay. We're very familiar with the Hartford Steam Boiler product and have made it available to some of our clients. However, the policy is limited. It has 2 of the 4 insuring agreements. There's no coverage for fines and penalties or public relations firms. Also, we're adding property managers as an insured under our policy, where right now we don't know anybody who's doing it.
Okay. So as far as you know, we're the only ones that cover the property manager.
Exactly.
Okay, that's good to know. Very good to know. And Melissa also wants to know, how much is this coverage going to cost?
Okay. The cyber liability insurance is a fairly new concept. So what we are doing right now in the process of negotiating a special policy rate that has broad coverage for community association premiums starting around or as low as $500.
Okay, so they're very reasonable.
Yeah, and we hope that coverage will be available by July the 1st.
Okay, July the 1st. Okay, so check back with us, and I'll be sending an announcement out when it is available to your emails. So keep checking your email, and we'll be making an announcement when it is available. And Kevin, I have heard that you have sublimits on certain agreements. Is that true?
Yes. For the coverage we're providing, they're typically sublimits, but they're small. For example, you can have a $500,000 limit on the liability portion and drop it down to $100,000 for breach costs such as forensic and notification. Or another $100,000 sublimit may apply to regulatory fines and penalties or the property manager itself.
Okay. Thank you. And then Mark from New York, Mark Matthews from New York City has a question. He says, can an individual unit owner purchase a cyber liability policy themselves?
Okay. No. I mean, it's not necessary, basically. The protection that individual need is called an identity theft policy. The data breach is connected to identity theft, meaning that when your personal data is stolen, they will use your information to make fraudulent loans, make cash withdrawals, purchases, basically destroying your credit. What you have to do if you're an individual, get an identity theft policy. That gives you the protection that you need.
Okay. Thank you for explaining that. And then, does the association have to have a website to need this type of coverage? That was another question from Melissa.
Okay. No. The only requirement is that the board members have access to the individual's personal identifiable information. Now, also keep in mind that a data breach can occur from paper records as well. Outdated unit owner information, old credit card receipts, and employee files that have been thrown into the dumpster are just as valuable as if a hacker logged into your network.
Absolutely. So there's multiple ways that information can be stolen. The old-fashioned way from paper records, and now it's all cyber.
Yes.
And Kevin, we've heard a term thrown around quite a bit, social engineering. Can you explain to everybody joining us today what exactly is social engineering?
Okay, social engineering is covered under the crime policy. This is not a cyber liability coverage. It is a crime coverage, and it covers social engineering fraud. Now, when we talk about social engineering fraud, it's the manipulation of people into divulging confidential information for the purpose of committing fraud or gaining access to the system for fraudulent means. Now, let me give you an example. A board member sent an email asking the manager to forward a payment to a different bank. Payment was made. The manager realized later that the email was not from the board member. The email sender used the funds to purchase airline tickets. The manager realized the fraud and tried to cancel the airline tickets. The airline said no.
Mm. That's too bad.
So again, this is a crime coverage, okay? In order to have this coverage, an employee must be convinced that the request to send the money on alternative location is legitimate, and then therefore acts upon that request.
And Kevin, I've also heard of another type of, I mean, every day there's something new going on out there. I've heard about this new thing called spear phishing. What exactly is that?
Social engineering thing. What it does is, instead of having regular phishing when you send these emails out and saying, guess what, you're no longer Bank of America, you belong to Citibank, please give me your information. What they do is now the individual specifically looks for information and targets the individual. For example, by using social media, Facebook or LinkedIn, you find the president of your association is in Hawaii on vacation. The hacker himself finds out and uses the information to mislead the manager in sending funds to a fictitious account.
Social media, and everybody's posting their vacation pictures, Kevin. So this is I imagine this is happening more and more now.
Yeah. In many cases, these hackers, they infiltrate an email conversation that's been able to obtain from the client or vendor or supplier signature to even make this thing even more legitimate. Some even, they'll amend the phone numbers on the document itself, on the email itself, so you can call back the phone number that's there to just confirm that the thing is legitimate, and of course they're going to verify the information. And then when that happens, most companies don't even realize a deception has occurred until they're notified by the real person who's missing the money that they never received a legitimate payment. And then once discovery is made, it's too late. So it's really important to make sure you have this social engineering coverage under your crime. And again, this is something that's brand new. Most people in our industry have no idea it even exists.
And it's amazing what they can do. They're getting very sophisticated with putting in fake phone numbers or real phone numbers, but they're going to the con person, and then the email panel. I mean, they really are getting unbelievably sophisticated. It's scary. And Kevin, I did get one more question in. I don't know if you have time to answer one more question. Okay, great. Okay. This is from Mark, also from New York. Hello, Mark. Mark Matthews. He had asked a question that we answered before. And he says, great webinar. He said, Mark's question is, if the property manager has a cyber policy, what should the association be asking the property manager about their coverage?
Okay. It's a good question. And again, it goes back to the association itself. The association needs their own policy, because once that information is stolen, once that information is lost, it's their information. They own the information, the association does. The property manager can come in and say, we're going to take care of all of your issues right now. That property manager may have reached over, he may manage 100 associations. He may not have an adequate limit to protect him for all 100 associations that have been breached. So by having their own coverage, you can provide the coverage that they need in case of a real actual data breach.
Okay, great answer. Thank you, Kevin. And Mark had one other section to his question. If the association were to buy a cyber policy in their name, would it act as excess over the property manager's policy?
It probably will, because both policies have excess provision in the terms and conditions, so I think it will be excess. But again, what we want to do is eliminate the cross-pointing fingers at each other. What we're saying is that we're going to pick it up at the property manager or not. The problem with the property manager is that they may not have adequate limits, because when there's a loss, it's different between having an association loss of 45 units versus 100 associations with 45 units, each association. That's the problem the property manager faces. So he may have coverage, but when it comes down to your association, you want to make sure you have your own protection, because you may need it.
Absolutely. So all bases are covered. Absolutely. Well, great. Well, thank you, Kevin. Thank you very much. Yes, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you think of any other questions later on when the webinar is over, feel free to email them to me at sbranson@kdins.com. And if you'd like a copy of today's presentation, I can also email you a copy. And we'll be putting a replay of the webinar up on our website where you can listen to it again, because we put it on YouTube every month. So thank you all for joining us, and please join us in June for the next webinar, which is June 25th, which is Tune Up Your Career. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Take care.